Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Lettuce Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Super Touch Quirk. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Third-person POV. Toshinori is about 90% sure he's having a fever dream right about now. He's at an orphanage when it happens. Surrounded by absolutely delightful children, all of them climbing him like he's a jungle gym and swinging off his arms like little monkeys. Their excitement is adorably contagious, but he can't help but be drawn to the little boy watching from afar. He's sitting in the corner when Toshinori first lays eyes on him, looking at All Might with such raw, open concern that the number one pro can barely hold back a flinch. His pair of massive green eyes look like they're peering right into his very soul. Like this cute little kid knows every one of his secrets and then some. For a moment he waits. He doesn't want to force the kid into anything, and supposes his hesitance may be a small bout of anxiety. It isn't every day a hero shows up, he knows. He shoots glances to the boy, painfully aware of how his viridescent eyes track him across the room. It's uncanny to feel so watched by someone so small. He's never run across a child quite like this before. He's rescued a few who shy away and curl into themselves like wilting flowers hiding from the sun. This is different than that, he knows. Toshinori, ever the bleeding heart, can't help but feel concerned. So he approaches, naturally, because what else is he supposed to do? The kids are all distracted running around with never-ending energy that keeps them bouncing off the walls for hours on end. The boy shrinks back as Toshinori approaches. He knows he's intimidating in his hero form, standing at well over 7 feet tall with a broad frame. Most children are too odd to be afraid, and those who are despite that tend to get over their shyness quickly. Toshinori is sent into a spiraling bout of distress when tears fill this child's eyes. He doesn't even seem afraid, necessarily. Just worried if Toshinori was going to put a label on it. It's unusual. He gives his best grin and crouches down to say hello. If something is wrong, he wants to help. The boy stares at him quietly. There's a weight behind his gaze that prevents Toshinori from looking away. He's intrigued, taking in his fluffy hair that seems to curl wildly in every direction. He's got a smattering of freckles strewn across his cheeks like misshapen constellations. He's precious, and Toshinori ponders why he hasn't been adopted yet. The boy can't be more than 9 or 10, looking impossibly small, all curled up in the corner like he is. A part of All Might wants to get a blanket and wrap the poor kid up like a burrito. There is a bone-deep sadness that reflects back at him when he locks eyes with him. He internally panics for a moment. His smile and booming laugh is usually enough to brighten any child's day. He can't tell what's upsetting this poor boy, but it's clearly something serious if the tears about to spill over are anything to go off of. Before Toshinori can do much of anything, the boy reaches out a tentative hand. It's impossibly small compared to his, but he still lets the little boy take it. He watches quietly as the little boy turns it over palm up, placing his own, much smaller hand flat down on it. It's not even half the size of his. His hands are impossibly soft against his calloused ones, warm and alive and oh so very little. He can't help but smile, his confusion showing only slightly through his tentative grin. The boy peers at him for a moment, seeming to inspect him a moment longer before turning back to their connected hands. The heat of the boy's palm increases. He feels a jolt of what feels like electricity travel up his arm. For a moment Toshinori wonders what's happening. And then he sees the kid's eyes glowing green and realizes, oh, this kid is using his quirk on him. Entirely concerning all things considered. Though, noting that now would be pointless. Before he can quite bring himself to pull back, something happens. His injury, the one he's had for almost a year that can't be healed and is going to probably kill him, eventually vanishes. As in, disappears. As in, it is no longer there. In an instant, it's gone. Just like that. He blinks and misses it, feels it fly right over his head. He can feel the tight skin vanish and the agonizing pain in his lungs snap away like a rubber band pulled taut. The pressure in his chest ejects itself. The strain of keeping his quirk active lifts immediately, and Toshinori is so utterly surprised by the sensation that he actually loses his grip on one for all. He expects the usual puff of smoke to appear and expose his massive secret. It takes a few seconds to click and realize that it isn't going to happen. That his quirk is off, and there's not even a bit of smoke to be seen. He doesn't deflate like he usually does. The skinner, unhealthy form caused by his injury has suddenly retired itself just like the wood itself. His shock is so palpable that he almost opens his mouth and screams. It's a true fight to keep his mouth shut and not shriek at the very top of his lungs. The little boy, fat tears rolling down his cheeks, grabs his large hand with both of his and gives it a squeeze. Only now he's smiling, and all Toshinori can do is stare back with wide eyes and a ghostly pale complexion that speaks as a testament to just how hard he's reeling right now. This kid healed him. This kid somehow knew he was hurt, grabbed his hand and poof. Injury gone. Goodbye. He's fine now. Absolutely fine. His quirk isn't even on and yet his muscle mass is retained, as though he was never injured to begin with. The world around Toshinori slows. He can't breathe, and he's not sure his heart has beat a single time in the last 30 seconds. He had resigned himself to his new life stubbornly. He'd tried to find a healer, he'd failed, and he'd moved on. That was okay. All good things had to come to an end eventually. It had been worth it to take all for one down, he's sure. The injury he'd gotten would kill him one day in the not-so-far-off future according to Night Eye. It had been the cause of their falling out, the whole reason they hadn't spoken since that fateful day at the hospital. It feels like he's breathing for the first time. His mind struggles to comprehend the sudden loss of his future cause of death. Of his debilitating weakness. It's gone. This child took it and he doesn't know what to do. Green eyes inspect him further. They're too smart for someone this boy's age. He doesn't let go of Toshinori's hand, holding it softly as though trying to be supportive, a knowing gleam shining out at him. All Might opens his mouth to say something. He snaps it shut not a moment after, his teeth clacking together painfully. What does he say in this situation? Is this real? It can't possibly be. Recovery Girl explored outlets all across the globe, reaching out to old friends and contacts in hopes of finding someone, somewhere who could help him heal. Help him get back to his former glory, expand his time from 5 hours a day to all hours a day, just as it used to be. Nothing came of it. Toshinori had been forced to accept and adapt. Only now that's all a moot point, isn't it? The hand the boy isn't holding shakily comes to pat at his side, feeling for the twisted injury under the taut fabric of his hero suit. There's no irritated twinge when he does so. He takes in a shaky breath of air, not daring to pull away from the little boy. The child looks at him like he's hung the moon and stars, smile so full of relief that Toshinori melts. The emotions seem too raw and developed to belong to a child so young. Yet they do clearly. They're all soft and green and rounded at the edges. They press into him with a calming ferocity. Pushing but not so much that it hurts. There's a demand there that he isn't sure how to answer. "What's your name, my boy?" All Might asks quietly, unable to say much of anything else. The boy's smile is brilliant. It lights up the room, everything bright and real in the world. It washes over him like a refreshing summer rain. Toshinori breathes in deeply and fully, his shoulders going lax for the first time in nearly a year. He does not feel like a building about to collapse. He feels hearty and full. Revived in every sense of the word. This boy who he did not know and who did not know him had seen through the veil and reached out, selfless and without another motive. He can see that clearly in the boy's face. It is the one thing he's certain of right now. "I am Izuku." His voice is small. It rings in his ears, echoing like a sign. Something resolute settles in his chest. The tides feel like they're shifting. In what direction, Toshinori can't tell. He doesn't scramble to find out. He stays settled there inside, Izuku still holding his hand like he's still trying to make sure he's okay before he lets go. There is still worship in his eyes, but he doesn't look at Toshinori like he's untouchable. He looks at him like the human being he is. Sees him and accepts him and smiles despite it all. Toshinori feels like crying. Like hugging this boy and never letting go. He wonders where he came from. How he ended up here. He could never fathom someone letting such a sweet child go. He doesn't know him, but it feels like he does. He can't explain it. There's a warmth in his chest. Izuku is small and meek, but there's miles of kindness that stretch out behind his green eyes and small smile. His face is so open and genuine, and he feels so much and so deeply for someone so young. For a good moment he simply sits. He stares and mulls, and continues to question what in fresh F is actually happening right now. Izuku looks contented now, cheeks holding a happy flush that makes his heart feel lighter. His tears are gone down, dried away just as quickly as they'd spilled over. The kid seems content not to say anything, a quiet presence. He only vaguely registers a few other children calling out to him, shrill and incessant in their demands. He would have found it endearing any other time. Right now, he can't seem to turn away. Not until one of the caretakers lightly taps on his shoulder. His head whipped towards her. She startled slightly, blinking at the slightly stunned expression on his face. It was odd to see the number one hero without his signature grin. His eyes had cleared, the woman thought, no longer shadowed over until the whites were painted near black. It was such an odd thing to notice, but she supposed not uncharacteristic. The lightning had to have something to do with it. That didn't quite explain the shock splattered across his face like paint on a blank canvas. She gulped. Is everything all right? She asked hesitantly. The man stared dazedly, like he had no idea what she was asking. She flushed slightly in embarrassment. I mean, did you need anything, sir? All Might blinked at her for a moment. She glanced between him and Izuku, who looked rather happy to be holding his hero's hand. The caretaker momentarily wondered if the freckled boy had been bothering him in any way. He hadn't been here long. His refusal to talk had been attributed to the trauma that followed the death of his mother. There was no quirk listed under his name in the registry, but a visit to the doctor told them he didn't have a double-jointed toe either. It wasn't uncommon for children to develop their given powers and parents to put off or not bother taking them to the doctor until they were much older. It was a sign his quirk was probably something minor. At the very least it wasn't anything she had noticed. Yes. All Might seemed to snap out of it, shaking his head and smiling. It wasn't his larger-than-life grin. It seemed more sheepish and reserved. She watched with bewilderment as his cheeks gained a bit of a pink tint. Was it possible for the symbol of peace to be embarrassed? I was actually wondering if you could perhaps enlighten me on the adoption process at your facility? Izuku jolted, and her jaw dropped. Izuku knows when people are pain. He knows it as surely as he knows his own name. How people feel is a smell in the air. All-encompassing at times, so thick it's almost tangible and suffocating. He has seen many types of suffering in his short lifetime. He's seen it in himself when he looks in the mirror, hiding bruises and burn marks from school. In the elderly neighbor next door with chronic pain in her hands. In his teacher after they've jostled their broken leg. In his own mother, even when she'd died protecting him. His quirk was not one to be used lightly, he knew. His mother had told him in no uncertain terms that he was to hide it at all costs, and this much he could understand. Izuku knew that if people figured out he could feel and repair and fortify, they'd be after him. So he went to school apathetically, told his classmates he was quirkless, and took the backlash quietly. He knows it hurt his mother to see him like that. She was scared every day. Her palpable fear had been something that he'd lived and breathed for the longest, and now he wasn't sure what to do without it there. It's as relieving as it is sad. Bittersweet, an adult with more tact might say. It felt impossible to talk. His mom had been all he had, and now she's gone and he's alone. He wished he'd been there when it happened. He could have fixed her back up, do what he did best and hold her hand. Only he wasn't in the very end, and there's nothing he can do to change that. He doesn't have the strength to blame himself right now. He thinks he may break if he does. Instead he has to focus on making sure his quirk doesn't escape him. His mom had told Izuku to hide, to run, and to keep low. He understands this too. It was her strongest, most solid wish. It is the least he can do. Or so he'd thought, anyway. He hadn't had plans to use it before All Might walked in the door. The unexpected amount of pain was like a slap to the face. A harsh wake-up call that left him unable to focus. All he can do is stare, because he has never felt so much hurt before. All Might is injured and alone in a room full of people. He's desperate and resigned both at the same time. He feels lost, like he's wandering through the miasma of his own injury, treading turbulent waters in the middle of the ocean. Izuku can tell all this at a glance. His mother's words echo in the back of his mind. He tells himself he isn't going to approach. And he doesn't truly. He can't even try no matter how much he loves the hero. All Might comes to him instead, which he should have expected. He's smiling and crouches down and says hello. All Might has always been his idol. Everything Izuku hopes to be and more. A bright ray of hope even his mom felt they could rely on. A good man, she'd said, an even better hero. They'd watch his work on the news, cheering as he knocked down villains. He'd seem so untouchable through the screen. Izuku isn't. Scared or shocked? He's sad. He knows heroes are human too. That's fine, good even. But to be this vulnerable, this close to breaking, well, he can't sit back and do nothing. All Might is trustworthy. His mom was just as big a fan as Izuku. If anyone is going to keep his secret safe, it's him. This is the very least he can do. It's no wonder he patrols less and less. He's barely hanging on by a thread. His hero is dying. Who would dare leave someone in need like that when they knew they could do something? All Might gazes at him with mild concern. He's worried for him, a boy he doesn't know. There are a dozen other kids he could give his attention to, who would match his energy in tenfold and sing his praises. Izuku is weird and quiet, he knows, but his decision is made when All Might's brows furrow with worry. He reaches out and grabs his hand. There's not much to it after that. Third-person POV. Apparently being the #1 hero has its perks. A few hours go by, the press disperses after getting tired of waiting for so long, and soon enough Toshinori finds himself standing cluelessly in his apartment with a child in one arm and a ratty backpack in the other, not super sure how he even got here. There's also a hasty stack of paperwork, files, and other resources that he hardly understands the meaning of clutched so tightly in his hand he knows they'll be wrinkled. He has absolutely no idea what's happening. Just that the sun is setting, he's been healed, and now he apparently has a child. In his home. Their home. Izuku is quiet. He sits in the crook of his arm carefully, curled up like a little puppy. Toshinori's heart squeezes every time he dares to glance down at the boy, his throat closing up and his disbelief in himself surging. He did that. He just went and adopted a child. An entire, living, breathing entity. A tiny one. He's counting on him to pull through and give him the life he deserves. The caretakers told him what little they knew about Izuku's past. A loving mother lost tragically when their apartment building caught on fire. Izuku hadn't been there when it occurred. All Might suspects he would have stopped at nothing to save his mother if he had been. Overall, Izuku seems sweet. He'd looked up at him with tearful eyes when All Might had asked about their adoption process. Toshinori knew immediately what he was asking. He was trying to make sure he was sure he wanted to do this, and honestly, what kind of question was that? There'd be a cold day in hell when he was heartless enough to leave his literal savior behind. One who is so clearly hurt himself and in need of help. He's the #1 hero for a reason. What sort of man would he be if he couldn't save the one who'd pulled him from the depths of his ill fate? He isn't doing this out of some guilty obligation. He's doing it because this boy deserves it. Izuku had refused to let go of him after he made the surety of his decision clear. Since healing him, he'd clung to the hero. In an entirely endearing way that had Toshinori melting. He caved quicker than he'd ever dare to admit. Big green eyes, tentative smiles. Lanced straight through his heart. He cradled the kid in one arm and did paperwork with the other. The caretakers found it absolutely adorable, eyes wide as he went through the painstaking process. Throughout the entire thing, Izuku never let go. Stayed nestled against him securely. Toshinori could feel himself become more and more taken with every passing second. Now he's full of teeming anxiety and a fair amount of elation over what's just happened. A little voice in the back of his head traitorously chants, "Son, son, son." He reminds himself that he just met this boy today and to slow down. "I looks like it's just you and I, my boy." All Might gave a grin despite how fast his heart was racing. What has he done? He's not qualified to take care of child. Why had they trusted him with this? They'd practically handed Izuku over with little to no questions asked. He knew he was registered as an emergency foster parent, as most heroes were, but they'd tossed over full custody like it was a steaming pork bun. He knew he had lives in his hands every day, but this was a new sort of responsibility. Toshinori had no idea how to deal with it. He was exhilarated and ready, but scared at the same time. Like being on a roller coaster with no seatbelt or bar of any kind. Izuku peered up at All Might in awe. He could feel his nerves from here, fraying at the edges from stress. He felt guilty. He hadn't healed All Might just so he'd feel obligated to take him. Izuku would never want to take advantage of someone like that. He just wanted to help was all. He knew he wasn't supposed to. His mom had said so, no matter how much he wanted to at times. It was bad for him. There'd be bad guys after him if they ever found out, she'd once told him in a very hushed tone. The idea is enough to make him shrink in on himself. He doesn't want to cause trouble or draw attention to himself. A selfish part of him tells him he's only here because he won't let go of the hero. That if he'd detached himself sooner and hadn't clung to All Might like some sort of spider monkey, maybe he wouldn't have been driven to take him in. It's a little too late for that now, he supposes. Izuku never thought he'd be in an apartment again. Let alone All Might's. It's bigger than the one he and his mother shared, slightly cluttered and well lived in. The couch looks worn, one of All Might's hero suits draped over the back of it like it's nothing more than a dirty towel. The coffee table is covered in paperwork that Izuku forces himself not to look too closely at out of curiosity. The entire place smells like orange blossoms and pomegranates. Official All Might merchandise scattered around in vague piles like little troves of treasure. Izuku is half tempted to squirm out of the hero's arms just so he can go awe at it. He knows he wouldn't make it far. Enough to see. Why you didn't have to. Izuku ended up squeaking out, hoping the pro know he isn't going to be upset if he changes his mind. All Might blinked at him for a moment, smiling soon after and shaking his head. He gave a boisterous laugh that sent strong tremors through Izuku's body with its intensity. It was the type of laugh Izuku saw on TV. The very same one he used to imitate when he was much younger, jumping off the couch and running down the hall in his All Might onesie. Something warm filtered through his chest as the blonde hero grinned at him. Izuku was momentarily floored. He'd just been adopted by All Might. And now they're at his apartment together. His actual, real-life home. You truly are selfless in nature, young Izuku. All Might beamed at him, eyes light and airy. Izuku watched him take a deep breath. He could feel it in the pro-hero's lungs, bright, clear, and everything they supposed to be. His quirk had done exactly what it was supposed to. He was impossibly glad. Just as relieved as he was scared, but he couldn't fight past the lump in his throat and admit it out loud. You've gone out of your way to help me. I'm not doing this because I feel indebted to you, my boy. I'm doing this because you deserve more than a life in an orphanage. You've done a great deed. I would not have done this had I not entirely wanted to. Trust me, my boy. I have many regrets in life. I can surely say this is not one of them. Izuku could tell All Might wasn't lying. It caused his heart to flutter and his eyes to become misty for what felt like the millionth time that day. Someone wanted him? The notion was very odd. Since his mother had died, he'd felt aimless. Nothing more than background noise in the orphanage. He was a little too old and a little too quirkless to be adopted. Though his power was technically listed as unknown, he knew people cautioned against it in case it turned out he had been born without a quirk. Izuku didn't mind. He hadn't really wanted to be adopted before now. If he had been, there was a chance that family would have been killed too. But All Might was different. He was everything powerful and secure in the world. A force not easily beat. Izuku wonders if the man would have taken him if he hadn't healed him. The man had approached him before, concern clear on his face as he crouched down in front of him. Izuku knew in that moment that healing him wouldn't be a mistake, no matter the treacherous drawback that loomed afterwards. The man who'd given so much of himself to heroics deserved to save too. It was his turn. Izuku would never take that away from him, no matter how much he knew it would hurt. The mere thought caused him to grip the hero tighter, his heart thumping like a jackrabbit. He knows he has to do it. Like ripping a band-aid off. He's afraid. He doesn't regret it, and he knows it's unavoidable. But with an injury as bad as his was, he knows it'll hurt. Toshinori glanced around the apartment helplessly. He should have planned this better. Well, he guessed there wasn't much he could have done. It's not like he went into that charity event expecting this to be the outcome. He's healthy now, his injury healed. He has Izuku now as well. He wants to get to know the boy. He'd never met someone so young with that much drive. His deep-seated emotions were absolutely flooring. They were so potent and present that All Might could get a read on them just by looking the child in the eyes. It was amazing, truly. Many things about Izuku were. The way he had so clearly seen through him and so readily healed his ailment. The intelligence uncharacteristic of his age. We'll have to go out and get you some furniture. All Might realized, stepping further into his apartment. He looks around. This isn't going to be enough for a kid. Nothing about his apartment is 10-year-old ready. He blanches a bit. And some clothes, I suppose? In school. You have school, don't you? You're old enough for that? Izuku swallows a laugh at the absolutely lost expression on his hero's face. All Might was so confident on the screen. To see him express such open emotions outside his hero persona made him feel warm and trusted. Izuku wondered if he was really up for this. He wasn't going to cause unnecessary problems, of course. But who in the world thought 10 years old was too young for school? Izuku wouldn't complain. It was funny, honestly, and he didn't want to cause any more trouble than he already had. All Might seemed to slouch slightly, carefully moving to set him down. Izuku hesitantly let it happen, wobbling slightly as he was placed on his own 2 feet. He didn't let go of All Might's hand. The man made no move to make him. Izuku was glad. It meant he had a little longer. Not very good at this, my boy. I apologize. He set Izuku's backpack down as well. He gave a grin, still gripping the stack of paperwork hard. I just realized I never formally introduced myself. My name is Yagi Toshinori. Izuku lit up. All Might's name. It's nice to meet you. Izuku grips his hand a little tighter. He can't do this forever. He's scared, but he has to get it over with sooner rather than later. He knows this. He's been putting it off for a while now. It will all be okay once it's over. He can do this. He doesn't have a choice, but once again he has no regrets. He'd do it again even knowing how bad it's going to be. All Might pet his head a little, giving a small smile. His heart warmed as the boy averted his eyes shyly, seeming almost hesitant. A small bit of concern wormed its way into his stomach at Izuku's fidgeting. He wondered if something was wrong, or if he'd done something. What is it, my boy? He asked softly. You don't have to be shy around me. Anything you need, I'm here to get it for you. Izuku bit the inside of his cheek, his grip on All Might's hand tightening. He took a few deep breaths. Wanted his mom. He really, really wanted his mom right now. It would be okay. His quirk wasn't one that killed. He knows that. It isn't going to kill him. He just has to remind himself that. Even if it hurts, he's going to be okay. He just has to get it over with. It won't be long, he's sure. He has to believe that. My quirk H has a side effect. Izuku admitted. Toshinori froze, his entire body immediately going stiff with surprise. Izuku backpedaled. On me. And not on you. All Might felt his heart beat its way into his throat, gazing at the child. What kind of side effect? He'd seemed fine until now. He should have known such a powerful quirk would have some sort of adverse reaction. He can see that Izuku is apprehensive and scared. He's beginning to sweat a little, almost like he's trying to mentally prepare himself for something. Those earnest green eyes turn on him, a little apologetic and entirely pleading. All Might's gaze drops to where Izuku is still holding his hand. Something cold settles into the pit of his stomach when he realizes there might be another reason the boy has refused to let go of him so far. Can he stop it? All Might feels himself start to close up. He can't let this happen. He doesn't know what Izuku is about to go through, but it's enough to scare the boy. He can see that. He knows he should try his best to stay calm, but how can he? A child reaches out and heals him. And now something awful is going to happen to them because of it. He can see it. Izuku's eyes are too open and honest to hide anything but the truth. Toshinori is stunned at how easily he can read him. He can see the raw fear growing stronger and stronger in the boy's gaze. He doesn't want to do this, but he's going to. It's enough to fill Toshinori with dread. Izuku, All Might, breathed carefully. He swallowed thickly. His voice rings impossibly quiet in the apartment. He can feel some amount of fear trickling down his spine. What is this child about to go through? Because whatever it is, it's his fault. He'd let the kid heal him. Izuku, what's going to happen when you let go of my hand? Izuku gave a shaky smile, tears spilling over, and All Might's heart plummeted. Don't panic. Izuku gave him a squeeze, like he was trying to do the comforting. All Might's chest tightens, panic surging at the determination in those green eyes. It won't kill me. I promise. I just have to ride it out. So don't worry about me, okay? And please, don't take me to a hospital. You can't. No. This isn't about this can't happen. Why hadn't he told him? He should have asked. All Might is going to be sick. He knows it's going to be worse. Worse than worse. He feels sick. Something dark grapples at him, and his quirk gives a panicked little buzz that tells him to get ready. Like a sixth sense that lets him know when there's a general state of wrongness. He can feel it now, so vivid and hurt. Something is about to happen to Izuku. To the very boy who'd saved him, who'd smiled at him as though nothing was wrong just moments ago. My boy dash, All Might moves to lift him up again, but it's too late. Izuku is already letting go of him, taking a small step back. White, hot terror grips Toshinori as a choking noise escapes his ward, the solemn expression from before twisting into something full of absolute agony. His heart stops. The files fall from his hand, scattering across his apartment's entryway. He catches the boy just before he can hit the floor, the child's breath coming out in short wheezes that send alarm bells shooting off in Toshinori's mind. Izuku screams. And not for the first time, Toshinori feels absolutely, utterly useless. It's a small blessing that his apartment is soundproof, but that's the least of his worries as the child writhes in his grasp, harsh, violent sobs pouring out in between his shrieks of agony. All Might holds him close, utterly stunned by the abrupt change of events. Panicked comfort spewing out like water from a burst pipe as he hastily stands. His head whips back and forth, and he's at a complete loss as to what to do. He's scared. Izuku has healed him, and now he's in pain and he doesn't know why or how or what's causing it. So much more pain than All Might was before, he can tell. He should have stopped him from using his quirk. He never would have gone near him if he knew this would happen. This is all his fault. Why hadn't he thought to ask about drawbacks before? Every quirk had some sort of drawback. One as strong and sure as his had been bound to do something. All Might wished it were a side effect that affected him instead. Not Izuku. The boy who'd gone out of his way to help him, so trusting and earnest, was now in agony. All Might fought back tears of his own, struggling to keep his heart from beating out of his chest in his frenzy. He has to help Izuku. But how? He's supposed to help him. He'd adopted him to help him, to save him, to get to know him. And now Izuku's body is covered in a cold sweat. His skin is clammy, yet he's somehow running a fever at the same time. The words, "Don't take me to a hospital," and "You can't," ring hollowly in the back of Toshinori's mind as he rushes around his apartment, wetting washcloths for his forehead and digging out fresh blankets for the boy. Izuku curls himself up into a tight ball in Toshinori's arms, fingers gripping the tough material of his hero costume desperately as his body trembles. All Might feels sick to his stomach. He's only 10. He's only 10 and he's in pain, and he can't do anything or stop it. He can tell the boy is trying to swallow his screams, eyes that had shone just minutes ago looking dull with misery and distress. Toshinori chokes out a sob. He doesn't know what to do. Instinct tells him to call Night-Eye even with how long's it's been, because he always knows what to do. He could look into the boy's future and check to see if he was going to be okay if he were here. He'd be clinical about getting him help. His head wouldn't be spinning the way Toshinori's was, and he'd be able to breathe evenly without losing himself. Toshinori's throat hurts. He wipes at his tears. He doesn't deserve to shed them. He isn't the one in pain. This is his fault. He should be able to help, and he can't, and he just doesn't know what the F he's supposed to do. He barely knows him. To Izuku, he's the #1 hero, a man through a screen. To Toshinori, he's a little boy who selflessly stepped up to save him. Toshinori doesn't know his favorite color or food, what shows he likes to watch, or if he likes to read, or if he has any friends at school, his hobbies and pet peeves, and his dream pet. He knows nothing, and yet here he is, suffering in his arms. It feels like he's dying despite what the boy said before letting go of him. All Might would never wish this on anyone. He could never. And now a child, a sweet, innocent kid who'd healed him knowing this would happen, was shriveling up, wilting in his arms and fading away. It felt like, "I'm here, my boy. It's okay." All Might breathed out as he settled the boy carefully on the couch, dabbing the sweat off his brow with the washcloth he'd procured. He scooted closer on his knees, blue eyes wide with fear and panic. What does he do? How does he help? Words fly from his mouth before he can stop them, even if he doesn't expect a verbal reply. Is there a way to help you? Is there a way to stop this? Why have you should have told me, my boy. To do this to yourself. It wasn't worth it. I would have been okay. Izuku cracked his eyes open to stare at him, gaze clouded. All Might felt a piece of his heart break off and shatter as the boy forced a smile. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to. Even now, his eyes convey it all. Somehow, Toshinori finds himself calmed slightly. He can imagine Gran Torino whacking him over the head and telling him what an idiot he's being. He's the adult here, the hero. He's seen the most gruesome and twisted of sights before and managed to keep his cool. Izuku is counting on him. He can tell. He knew this was going to happen and had trusted Toshinori anyway. He'd waited until they were here at home to let go, telling him all he had to do was ride it out. All Might would do anything to take the pain on himself, but he knows that isn't an option anymore. It's a cold, harsh truth, but he has to accept it. Instead of crying or freaking out, he lets himself trust Izuku back. Trust his words. He lets a smile stretch across his face. It's shaky and unsure, and definitely forced, but Izuku immediately unfurls himself at the sight of it nonetheless. Toshinori's Adam's apple bobs. He wraps his much larger hand around Izuku's tiny one, taking a deep breath. Izuku moves his hand so he can grasp his hero's back, his grip weak. He hopes Izuku feels as comforted as Toshinori did when he first met the boy. Toshinori gives his hand a reassuring squeeze. He owes this much to the boy. He's going to make this up to him tenfold. He's going to give him the world. He deserves it for daring to undertake this. Toshinori is. He's honored. This child knew the pain that was going to come and had healed him. He'd taken his injury away. He doesn't deserve it. He's not a perfect man or hero, but this child had seen him as worthy enough to undertake this massive burden. It's tragic, and All Might will definitely have to scold him for his recklessness. If it's going to hurt this bad, he shouldn't do it. Not for strangers. Not for Toshinori, no matter his standing. It will be okay, Toshinori said, tone sure and clear as the sun rise in the morning. Izuku shifted a little, turning so he could gaze at the blond man's face. Would you like to hear a story? Izuku tightened his grip for a moment. A confirmation. All Might settled, leaning against the couch. He doesn't let go of Izuku's hand. He talks about his time in America. He lets the sun set, not moving an inch and never looking away from the boy. He tells him about David and their time chasing down muggers in the back alleys of America. About his return to Japan and how he'd almost tripped over an elderwoman's corgi and went flying down an escalator. Even when Izuku squirms and whimpers, he holds strong, rubbing his back when he twists and turns and brushing his hair out of his face. He keeps talking until Izuku passes out, his posture crumbling and relief clawing at him as the boy's expression slackens into something peaceful. He doesn't check the time. He doesn't try to get up. Instead, he sits there and listens to the boy breathe. Finds reassurance in it, trying to calm himself. At some point, Toshinori finds himself nodding off too. He doesn't let go of Izuku's hand. Instead, he grips it a little tighter, a promise to protect. He hadn't been fooling around when he signed those adoption papers. It was a split-second decision, but not one he was doubtful of. He's going to protect Izuku from here on out. He never wants him to feel pain like this again. He's never going to let him feel pain like this again. He drifts off half-slouched onto the couch and promises himself that he's going to find out what Izuku's favorite food and color are as soon as he wakes up. It isn't much, but it's a peaceful thought. He thinks, even though he's still afraid and ridden with guilt, that everything will be okay. Third-person POV. When Izuku comes to, he doesn't hurt anymore. He doesn't know where his quirk came from in the family tree. He can see his mother reflected in the way he pulls injuries away from those plagued by them. He's not healing them, not technically. He's simply taking it away. The side effect is that he feels it. When he loses contact with the person he's repaired, any pain they experienced whilst in the process of getting said injury bears down on him with excruciating weight. He knew All Might had to have been fighting for hours on end to get such an extensive injury. He wondered how long it had been before someone was able to get to him and heal him up. Several hours based on how long he'd spent curled up on the couch. He'd felt it all. Every blow that led up to the grotesque wound All Might had gained. The agony he'd experienced raced through Izuku's veins even now, a harsh reminder of how much the number one hero had sacrificed for them. He tries not to think too hard about what kind of villain did that to the man. He knows that despite everything, All Might must have won, or at least damaged his opponent just as bad. Now his idol can be at full strength again. Now, if that villain ever shows up again, he can pummel him into the ground again just like Izuku is sure he did before. It's the next day now, Izuku realizes belatedly. He tries to forget what it feels like to have your lung ripped out as he cracks his eyes open, taking deep breaths to remind himself that he's okay and that none of it was actually real. It hadn't really happened to him. It was a side effect of his quirk. All Might had dealt with the same pain just as well, had lived with it, even. If he can do it and move on, Izuku can too. He must. He refuses to get hung up on something like this. He did it to help, and he isn't going to regret or disrespect that decision. He owes himself and All Might more than that. There's something curled softly around his hand, warm and comforting. His head turns. He's a little startled to see All Might sitting there still. Memories of the night prior flood past the remembrance of pain. Yagi-san's voice, a deep and reassuring tenor that told tales of his time as a hero and beyond. Told him all about his time in America. Izuku almost tears up at the memory. He'd been so worried for him, someone he barely knew. His panic had made Izuku's chest swell with guilt. Of course, All Might had panicked. He was the number one hero. Izuku should have seen it coming and found some way around it. He didn't really know, honestly. There wasn't much he could have done to get out of that, knowing the pain would start as soon as he let go of the pro. Izuku risks moving slightly. He expects to be sore. It's reflex, really, after feeling so much pain. His body doesn't protest, however. It's a little stiff from the tension he experienced, but the phantom pains don't return like his brain thinks they should. Izuku is sure it's the most excruciating pain he's ever had to experience in his lifetime. It's something he's glad he could take away from All Might. It's silly, but he feels closer to him after experiencing what he went through in that physical aspect. He understands, sympathizes, knows. Izuku likes to know. That being said, waking up after feeling like you just got ran over with a truck covered in knives still isn't the most pleasant, phantom pain or not. He can't fathom how All Might managed to survive that. The man is amazing, don't get him wrong, but everyone had their limits. Kacchan's was apparently extremely high. Izuku's was now too. He'd thought for sure his heart was going to bottom out on him and leave him for dead last night. He's pretty sure he felt part of his stomach get removed. A sensation he never thought he'd have to feel, but he digresses. Izuku shifts again, jumping when All Might's eyes fly open. The man's head is popping up immediately, gaze flying to him. Izuku blinks back, startled by the ghostly expression on Toshinori's face. The blonde hero's eyes scan him fervently, his entire body shifting closer. It casts a shadow over Izuku that would have been intimidating were it coming from anyone else. The hero is built like a bear with bunny ears, looming rather intimidatingly. "My boy, you're awake," he exclaims, straightening his entire body. Izuku's brows raise as the hero's back cracks like a glow stick. Sleeping slouched over like that couldn't have been comfortable. He feels bad about that too. Are you? He looks scared. Izuku can't help but smile a little, even if it's shy and hesitant. He feels pride swell in the deepest parts of his chest as he takes in the man's healthy appearance and brightened eyes. He did it. He did it. All Might is okay, and he hadn't died in the process of taking his injury. He'd been overdramatic, as presumed. The pain was gone and he's survived just fine. Was his heart still thundering a little? Yeah, maybe, but that was besides the point in the long run. He'd get over it. And All Might hopefully would too. "I'm okay." Izuku's voice comes out a little too loud. He lowers it, flushing with embarrassment as he pushes himself up. His shirt feels stiff from how much he sweat the night prior. "I am really sorry I didn't tell you about Dash." Izuku doesn't get a chance to finish his apology before he's being scooped up by All Might. He's careful about it, pulling Izuku into him like he's afraid he might break if he's any harsher. Izuku is rigid as a board as his face is shoved into All Might's shoulder, blinking rapidly to dispel the tears that threaten to form. The hulking man keeps a firm grip on him, the breath he takes in deep and shuddering. Izuku hesitantly allows his arms to come out and hug him back, unable to get them all the way around his neck. He's quiet, not sure what to do or say as Toshinori takes a moment to simply breathe. Izuku tries not to freak out about the fact that this is idle. It's All Might, the most amazing, strongest, coolest hero in the whole wide world is hugging him of all people. A man Izuku has always aspired to be just like is since he was in diapers, practically. He sat there all night waiting for Izuku to get up, worrying and fretting over him. Izuku could cry just thinking about it. He tries not to. He doesn't want to send All Might into cardiac arrest after just fixing his dented toolbox of a body. Izuku isn't going to say it out loud, but the guy needed some major TLC. "My boy," All Might's entire chest vibrates when he talks. Izuku tilts his head a little to let him know he's listening, feeling a little nervous. Is he in trouble? Is All Might going to take him back to the orphanage? He isn't going to be mad if that's the case. He caused a lot of trouble. All Might could be out patrolling today, yet he's instead here with Izuku. The man pulls back slightly to take a look at him, blue eyes piercing and full of a seriousness that makes Izuku start sweating all over again. What's your favorite color?" Izuku isn't sure why the question makes him burst out laughing, but it does. Izuku likes the color red and his favorite food is Kacchan. He's a big fan of heroes, All Might being his favorite, much to Toshinori's internal smugness, and likes to analyze their quirks and fighting tactics. All Might had observed this morning as the boy slowly peeked out of his shell, his eyes shining as he watched the hero news and quietly mumbled observations to himself, shoveling pieces of omelet into his mouth every so often. All Might made a mental note to look up some more recipes later when they weren't busy setting up the boy's new bedroom. So far it had been quite the taxing endeavor, but Toshinori felt like they were also getting somewhere close to done. The first thing All Might noticed about Izuku aside from his obvious shyness and selfless nature is how absolutely downright smart the kid is. He's no expert on child development by any means, but even he can tell this kid's thought process extends far beyond that of a normal 10-year-old's. Night Eye would absolutely love this kid, he noted mildly to himself. He'd muttered dozens of theories about the quirk of the villain Cementos and Gunhead had taken down this morning, talking about better ways they could have applied their quirk in order to get the villain faster. It was entirely astonishing. Toshinori felt insanely proud. Another thing he'd noticed that Izuku still didn't seem to be quite okay. He didn't appear to be in any physical pain, but sometimes he'd flinch or get a distant look in his eye. Or he'd reach to his side, the same side Toshinori's injury had been located on before the boy healed it. It's extremely concerning, and All Might has no idea what to do. Does he say something? Take the boy to a therapist? Izuku doesn't seem keen on talking about whatever his quirk is, eyes darting away when questioned. He doesn't want to push where he isn't welcomed. "Here we are," Toshinori boomed, dropping the dozens of bags of clothing and other necessities onto the carpeted floor of Izuku's new room, absolutely beaming. Moving out his old, untouched office furniture had been easy as pie without his injury. A quick trip to the mall in which he wore a clever disguise, a ball cap, sunglasses, a mask, and a shirt with his own face on it had gotten the young boy a whole new wardrobe. Partially against Izuku's will, as he had been very hesitant to go into any stores, but they'd made do. Especially after Toshinori emphasized his being the #1 hero had its perks, after all. You didn't have to get me all of this. Izuku's voice came out a very timid squeak that made Toshinori want to squish his cheeks together and coo. He was just such a cute kid. Very shy, but definitely the sweetest 10-year-old Toshinori had ever met, and the most mature. Wasn't he supposed to throw tantrums and demand candy or something? Ice cream instead of actual meals? This was almost too easy. It was a novel experience. It felt more along the lines of movie logic than it did real life with how good Izuku was. Toshinori was very proud to say that they had already started bonding, and young Izuku was already becoming more comfortable with him. They'd both spent about 2 hours struggling to put his bed, dresser, and desk together. Izuku was much better at it than he was, nodding at the instructions whilst Toshinori cluelessly stared at the diagrams and tried to understand why he specifically needed to use screw type B12 to put pieces E and F together, and why said screw had to go through hole 13 on one piece and hole 4 on the other. He was the muscle in this scenario for sure. Izuku had been very flustered to see the furniture delivered when they'd gotten back from the mall, eyes wide. Toshinori had definitely not taken photos. Nonsense. Toshinori beamed excitedly, hands planted on his hips. Izuku's room was coming together grandly. He'd given the kid a free run of any merch he could find lying around. Previously, Toshinori would have kept it all for Night Eye, who took great pride in his All Might collection. Seeing as that was no longer an option at this time, it had started accumulating around his home in heaps. He was endlessly flattered by Izuku's awe over the multitude of action figures of posters, watching the boy run around and dig through boxes whilst rambling about limited edition, this and only 50 ever made, that. It was completely adorable even if he had no idea what the kid was talking about half the time. Wait, we didn't buy you any school supplies, my boy. It's fine. Izuku really didn't need any. Toshinori looked absolutely distraught by the mere notion, like he'd just created a great blunder. Izuku was beginning to realize that All Might, while just as large as life as Izuku had always known him to be, was also a dork. Just like Izuku. He was doting and had absolutely no idea what in God's name he was doing. That's not to say Izuku did either. This was uncharted territory for both of them. It didn't make it any less funny to watch the #1 hero freak out over menial things. Izuku was wondering if maybe he had a better grasp on the situation than the man did. I still have plenty. It's almost summer, anyway. I had forgotten about summer break. Toshinori announced. Izuku blinked at him. Had he just forgotten how the school system worked? Izuku wasn't even surprised anymore. Do we need to go on vacation? I don't think so. Izuku didn't know. He and his mom always made it a point to go to the beach a few times, but he wouldn't exactly call that a vacation. Paresi summer didn't mean it was required they go somewhere in that case, right? He was starting to question himself now that he thought about it. I see. Toshinori nodded thoughtfully. How was he going to watch Izuku? He could get a babysitter. His mind immediately went to Gran Torino, and he shuddered. Nope, never. He'd find one on Google. He looked grimly at his ward, who stared back with big, innocent eyes. He would not befall the same fate as Toshinori. He simply couldn't. Though he was going to have to search long and hard for someone competent enough to keep a secret, it would be worth it to save him from the clutches of that man. My boy, don't talk to short men in capes under any circumstances. Especially if they like taiyaki. I will handle it. I wasn't planning to. Izuku eyed him weirdly, but Toshinori just nodded grimly, folding the shirt he'd grabbed. It was so tiny compared to his hands. Izuku was so small. Izuku moved to change the subject before All Might could make any more weird, out-of-the-blue demands. You. Am I going to school tomorrow? Aldra Elementary School was about an hour away. Nothing to All Might, who could clear entire prefectures with a single leaping bound. He'd gathered all the papers he'd dropped on the floor the day prior and combed through them carefully. He'd even went and ordered a filing cabinet just so he could keep track of things like Izuku's social security card and birth certificate, and any assignments he brought home. With how smart he was, however, All Might was sure plenty of them would end up on the fridge. He was going to need so many magnets. If you want to. All Might said easily. He'd been watching the boy closely for any more signs of side effects, but Izuku still seemed to have fully recovered from whatever that bout of pain was. He tried to ask specifically what it was, but the shivers that would rack through Izuku's body told Toshinori the boy wasn't quite ready to go into detail, even after their furniture-building bond. That was fine. He was just glad he was okay now, and he was more than patient enough to wait. He dug through the bag he'd been occupied with, pulling out 2 pairs of sunglasses. Look, my boy. Now we can match. Izuku's laughter was like bells. Toshinori's grin grew so wide it hurt. Third-person POV. It's too late for All Might now. He's gone. Taken if you so prefer. He will never return, and he's perfectly fine with that, to be quite frank with anyone who may or may not have an issue with it. He is satisfied and proud of his new position. Izuku still isn't entirely out of his shell, but the part of him that is just so happens to be extraordinary. Now, Toshinori never imagined himself as a father. It simply wasn't in the cards for someone like him. He knew he was taking a risk taking this kid in the way he had. He still probably shouldn't have, to be honest, but when has that ever stopped him? His nemesis is dead, and there was simply no possible way he was leaving Izuku at that orphanage after what he did for him. Thus, he now has a child, and they are probably the best one in the whole entire world. Naturally. Obviously. Clearly. Izuku still isn't over the pain of his quirk's drawback, but he hides it well and still won't talk about it. He'd woken up from a nap earlier screaming and sweating absolute buckets, but Toshinori was armed and ready this time around. Single parenting articles were plentiful. His research was fruitful, and he was vaulting over the couch and scooping him up into his arms before the kid could get a single word out. It had been a very long time since he'd had to study for much of anything, but now he's cramming and he isn't about to stop. He's full steam ahead, ready to call Dave and ask for tips if the need arises. He's pulling out all the stops. He even called Izuku's school and told them very firmly he would not be coming in. They had seemed a little weirded out by his tone but had accepted. No matter. Izuku is smart. He's funny and bright, and has a million interests packed in that little brain of his. He's very into politics, oddly enough. Tis a little strange, but he's so absolutely adorable and earnest that Toshinori really doesn't care. He's caring and hungry for knowledge. They get along like a house on fire. Toshinori can't get enough of it. Quirk inequality in the workforce is worse now than ever. Izuku stabbed his fork into the scrambled eggs All Might had made. The man could proudly say they were only slightly overcooked. Izuku shoved some in his mouth, waving his fork around to accentuate his point. The tides have changed. Strong quirks and mutation ones used to be heavily frowned upon, but now the opposite is true. Having too weak of a quirk can be the difference between a plentiful career and homelessness. It's insane how quickly people turn on one another. I suppose the coin has flipped, hasn't it? Toshinori hummed thoughtfully, drumming his fingers on the table as he considered the boy's words. An article he had read said to encourage creative thinking. This seemed creative enough, right? Do you think there's anything that can be done? Izuku got an odd look on his face, leaning forward slightly. Toshinori immediately leaned forward too. They shared a look. That I mean. Izuku's voice came out small. He glanced to the side as though expecting someone else to be there listening. Some peaceful rioting and a few strikes never hurt anyone. Awareness is really what's needed. Toshinori swallowed a laugh at the look on his face. He cleared his throat. Publicity is important. He agreed. Accountability too. Izuku said, shoving more eggs in his mouth. There are some people in places of power who abuse their quirks and don't get in trouble for it. All Might blinked at him curiously. That was an interesting point to bring. These types of things weren't something he paid a ton of attention to, honestly, but he was beginning to see that changing in the near future. Izuku seemed very impassioned by what the world lacked. Toshinori could hardly keep up. A little pathetic when you considered Izuku's age, but that was alright. Toshinori had always been a little more bronze than brain anyway. In places of power. Can you give an example? Toshinori asked. Izuku looked both smug and determined. He got an example. He got several examples, actually. Needless to say, All Might was going to be looking a little more into the testimonies of those involved in Endeavor's villain takedowns. Because there appeared to be a disconnect there in which innocent people were, getting burned alive. Which he couldn't say he was a massive fan of. It was both shocking and yet not at the same time. This was a future him problem for right now. He had bigger things to concern himself with. And then you fold this part. Toshinori instructed. Izuku squinted and nodded, cheeks puffing out in his concentration. The pro-hero had his phone out, was snapping a picture, and then stuffing the device back in his pocket all before the freckled boy could look up again. Izuku remained none the wiser. Toshinori could see his future scrapbook growing thicker by the minute. Are you sure this is the right way to do it? Izuku looked very suspicious. Toshinori didn't blame him. No. Toshinori hadn't made an origami hamburger since his time in America. But we're about to find out. Izuku seemed relatively fine with that. And if they ended up having to struggle for 2 hours to find the same YouTube tutorial All Might had used all those years ago, well, neither of them were going to say a word of it. I don't think we got the recipe right. Izuku admitted, staring at the flaming muffin pan still trapped inside the oven. Toshinori slouched next to him, looking gloomy. Izuku held his hand to try and make him feel better. I think you're onto something. Toshinori agreed with a sigh. He glanced down at the boy, wishing he could take a photo. He was holding his hand. Do you want donuts? Titch, there's a really good place by that one mall with the broken dome on top. Izuku offered hesitantly. Toshinori didn't need to hear much else. He was putting on his disguise the shirt with his own face on it and heading for the door before the kid could get another word in. Izuku pulled the pin on the fire extinguisher and took care of their little problem himself before racing after him. I never knew online shopping was so fun. All Might admitted. He'd never had a reason to buy much of anything online, but now he had Izuku and the boy was pretty pushy about Toshinori spending no money on him whatsoever. Even if he'd only been here a few days. This meant Toshinori had to shop from the comfort of his own home using his phone since Izuku would dig his heels in if he tried to bring him anywhere. The weekend was flying by yet somehow going extremely slow at the same time. The longer it lasted, the better. All Might was shamefully enjoying his vacation. It was a lot better when you didn't have to spend it alone. Why, you don't need to buy me anything else. Izuku insisted. Toshinori added a pair of matching All Might shirts to his cart, one in his size and one in Izuku's. The boy groaned. Stop. We need more disguises. All Might insisted, scandalized as Izuku went for the phone. Anything to stop him from getting more money spent on him. He had plenty of stuff. Toshinori didn't see the reasoning. If they wanted to go out and not get caught, they had to wear matching outfits. Simple as that. Look around. Izuku insisted, feeling bolder. Testing the waters with Toshinori had proven that the man put up with most anything and didn't get annoyed with his antics. He actually seemed excited when Izuku responded in kind to his enthusiasm. It was relieving and exhilarating. Izuku felt like he could really be himself. And snatch his phone without getting chucked through a wall and put in timeout. We're surrounded by shirts with your face on them. But look. Toshinori held the phone out of reach, angling it towards him so he could see. Izuku made a noise in the back of his throat. It says, "You can be the all to my might." I don't have one of those. Izuku was sure of it now. Toshinori All Might really was just a giant nerd. Izuku couldn't recall a time he'd felt so warm. Toshinori-san had gone above and beyond to make sure he felt welcomed and knew he wasn't a burden. And Izuku could feel parts of himself he'd locked away starting to wake up again and crawl out into the light. The pro-hero made it clear he was going to take care of him and make sure he had everything he needed. He was actually interested in Izuku and wanted to spend time with him. It was such a mind-boggling concept that Izuku could hardly wrap his head around it. He couldn't believe it. His one and only friend in the whole wide world was All Might, who'd adopted him. His favorite hero had adopted him. Willingly. With mild coercion from a healing quirk, but he didn't seem to regret it from what Izuku could tell. Izuku sure didn't. He felt a little bad he was detracting from the man's heroing, but he promised he'd get back on schedule tomorrow when Izuku returned to school. He said he'd only been able to hold his hero form for a few hours before meeting him, and that Izuku had given him back the ability to work full days and save more people than before. It gave Izuku a little bit of peace of mind. He allowed himself to enjoy the weekend a little greedily. My boy, you must try it. Toshinori insisted. Izuku eyed him skeptically. He'd tried more American foods over the past few days than he had in his entire life, but he wasn't complaining. Toshinori was so happy to have his stomach back that he kept going out to get food for them. Izuku wasn't about to try and stop him. Looks nasty, he admitted rather bluntly. Toshinori looked genuinely offended. How open-minded of you, the man said with sarcasm, but it wasn't the harsh kind. Izuku risked a glare back and felt giddy when the man didn't look upset, but only amused instead. Come on. Just put the French fry in the milkshake, young Izuku. What if I don't? Izuku checked. The man gave him a solemn look. Then I have failed. He sighed, looking sad. Izuku rolled his eyes and dipped the fry in the milkshake. He tried not to openly laugh at the way the pro-hero turned away and subtly fist-pumped. Going back to school was a little nerve-wracking. All Might landed in an alley across the street, hat covering his hair and blaring All Might hoodie on the throw-off the crowd. Izuku knew the man had his hero costume on under it and would be leaping back to the apartment to take it off as soon as Izuku was in the building. Knowing All Might was about to go out and do real-life hero work made him want to jump from foot to foot in his excitement. He couldn't wait to ask all about it. The last few days had felt like a dream. A dream he didn't want to wake up from. Do you have everything? Toshinori stressed, hands flitting around Izuku as he crouched down to his height to better inspect him. He was more nervous than Izuku was, blue eyes scanning over the boy endlessly as though expecting to find an injury or something of that sort. His mouth pulled into an uncharacteristic frown. Do you have your homework? Pencils? A sharpener? I use mechanical pencils. Izuku noted offhandedly, tugging on his backpack straps with a bit of anxiety. I don't know what those are. Toshinori groaned like he was burdened. Izuku gazed at him in disbelief. All Might wasn't that old, right? Just be careful. And call me if you need anything. Izuku didn't have a phone to call him on, but there was no way he was going to say that. Instead he gave a hesitant smile and a firm nod. The man deflated slightly, tension dropping. He gathered Izuku up in a hug. The freckled boy was quick to reciprocate. He'd been hesitant to chase any affection given to him by his new guardian, but All Might was all too willing to give it and Izuku was too weak to refuse. He squeezed as tightly as he could, hoping it would let Toshinori-san know that he was going to be just fine. Plus ultra and all that. He wasn't the one rushing out to fight villains. Toshinori inspected him 2 more times before Izuku was forced to scurry off to avoid being late, waving over his shoulder as he went. Toshinori waved back, feeling a little teary-eyed as he watched the boy go. He fanned his face like a teenage girl trying to dry her makeup. His face, which looked almost entirely different than what it had been before. Lack of his injury had lifted some of the shadows brought on by stress and strain, making him look younger than before. He wondered how the media was going to react. He wondered if Night Eye would notice him pushing past his usual limit, or if Gran Torino would call. For as long as Izuku was at school, he was going to be doing hero work. The thought was invigorating, even if he was worried about Izuku going off to school. Izuku kept his head low as he rushed into class. No one seemed to notice him as he went, uncaring that he was gone. Izuku tried to make himself as small as possible. It was a bold contrast to how he'd been before, he knew. He felt pathetic for it, but his quirk was something he had to hide at all costs, just like his mom had said. He doesn't know what will happen if the wrong people find out. He doesn't think he wants to know, even if he feels safer knowing All Might is in his corner. He thinks about what Toshinori-san must be doing. He can practically see the man now, flying through the sky, free of his injury and any pain. Bouncing from villain to villain and saving people without having to second-guess himself or his abilities. It makes pride well in Izuku's chest. It's the one thing he can claim for himself, he thinks. He did that. Though Izuku's side still aches with phantom pains and his nights are restless, it's worth it. He'll get over it, he's sure. Toshinori-san's grin is worth more than Izuku Yagi. His teacher's voice-calling role draws him from his daze. The woman looks only mildly surprised, eyes flitting up to him. She gives a small smile. It's rare to see it directed at him, but he takes it nonetheless. Something in his chest swells happily. Congratulations on the adoption. Izuku's smile doesn't leave all day. Even when Kacchan tells him he's useless and that he's surprised anyone would want him, and that they're sure to get rid of him soon. And when he rushes across the street after school to that same alley to find Toshinori-san waiting to scoop him up in strong arms and ask him giddily about his day, he decides that any grief school brings him is nothing compared to the contentment he's found. Third-person POV. Night Eye may be on the verge of a mental breakdown. It's still a little too soon to tell. Though he and Toshinori had a falling out, he doesn't care for the man any less than he did before. He couldn't stick around and watch the blonde destroy himself. The road the number 1 pro was on was short and uneven, and it ended with his death, too harsh and sharp to possibly be avoided. The mere fact that Toshinori had continued to do hero work despite Sasaki's pleading was just the first step on a set of stairs that would send All Might spiraling to his predicted end. He sits now in his office, squinting rather suspiciously at his computer screen. All Might's face surrounded him from every angle, smiling at him from the walls. Mirai doesn't mind. He's too used to it and admires him too much to ever be bothered. In fact, he rather draws comfort from the familiarity as he scrolls through the pro heroes' news articles, all of them reporting on the same remarkable feat that he honestly hadn't thought possible. Probably because it wasn't, but seeing so many reputable sources say the same thing made it harder to ignore. All Might had been pulling long shifts, longer than he had in the past year, working for upwards of 8 hours a day without halt. He didn't appear at all on the weekends. His previous schedule of working daily for around 3 hours had been the usual for the past year now. To see the sudden spike of activity had sent criminals scampering back into their hidey holes, fearful at the number 1 hero's burst of newfound activity. Looking at the videos of the man, Mirai was. He felt blown away. It was no wonder crime rates were dropping all over Japan. Toshinori looked just like he did before, eyes bright and grin unrestrained. The tired shadows on his face were no more, his expression proud and his posture strong. He darted around from attack to attack, traveling through the air instead of vanishing into back alleys after fights, now full of his previous bravado. He stopped to sign autographs and talk to fans, taking selfies with them just as he used to and interacting. He was trending all over Twitter, the public crowing with absolute joy over his return. Though he hadn't exactly left before, it sure felt like he was coming back from something. They were too happy to question just what that something was, but Mirai knew. He knew and he had questions. Sasaki drums his long fingers against his desk, a deep frown set on his face. He raked his brain for possibilities on how this could have happened and came up dry. They tried everything. He'd been there with Toshinori throughout the whole thing, watching doctor after doctor and quirk after quirk filter in and out of his hospital room, all of them hoping to help but never able to. It was a miracle Toshinori was even alive, and how he was able to do any hero work at all following the attack was beyond Night Eye. The sudden spike in activity shouldn't have been possible. It drove him insane, because he had most certainly not predicted this. Night Eye would almost claim it to be fake, a trick or imposter if he didn't know any better. He knew Toshinori better than he knew himself, and this was without a doubt him. His earnest expression couldn't be faked, nor could his heroism. His punches were backed by the power of the sun, which shined through his bright eyes and even brighter smile. He was blinding, just like he had been all those years ago when Sasaki first started working with him. It made his heart swell with emotion, and he knew he needed answers sooner rather than later. With a huff, he pushed himself back in his chair, standing with a definitive goal in mind. To his knowledge, Toshinori's address hadn't changed, and this was without a doubt a conversation to be had in person. Glancing at the time, Toshinori's new shifts would be long over by now. And if the man wasn't in his apartment when Sasaki got there, well, he was willing to wait. "Get back here!" Toshinori bellowed gleefully. Izuku raced through the living room at breakneck speed, weaving around the boxes of merch the blonde hero had still yet to clean up. Izuku had seemed astonished that he'd dare to think about throwing it away, his judgmental gaze more than enough to stop Toshinori in his tracks. He'd been ever so slowly siphoning it away, donating it to fans and orphanages and foster children, whilst Izuku was at school. When he wasn't too caught up doing his job as a hero, of course. It was all too easy to get caught up in the new, lively swing of things. "You'll never catch me," Izuku declared, knowing full and well his new dad could scoop him up any time he so pleased with his insane speed. Still, that didn't stop him from trying, sliding over the coffee table like a ninja and landing in a roll. He hadn't gotten to play like this since his mom died, and even she had been meeker, less willing to bound after him and race through their apartment. He didn't love her any less because of it. He'd never shift his view of her over something so petty. Yet, he could also acknowledge the way his heart was beating with reckless abandon as well. This was fun, and that was okay. "You can't escape Tickle Might forever," Toshinori said with dawning seriousness, his expression grim. Izuku shrieked with laughter, ducking and rushing away when the man bore down upon him again. Toshinori was not ashamed to admit just how much entertainment he derived from playing with Izuku. The childish games he came up with were interesting, and most of them even had plot. Was that normal for kids, or was it just Izuku? Did he really care? His son was a genius. And a cute one too. Dave would have a field day talking to the kid, he was sure. The past few days had flown by blissfully. Toshinori could recall the last time he'd been this happy. Izuku's intelligence seemed to grow by the day, his brain soaking up information like a little sponge. He grew happier the longer he was here, flourishing. It was more than Toshinori could have ever dreamed for the boy. He wasn't all that sad or hesitant anymore, coming into himself with Toshinori's firm nudging and acceptance. Toshinori still hadn't asked how he'd ended up in the orphanage or the story behind his quirk, but that was okay. They'll get there. School was a touchy subject too. Something was wrong, but Toshinori wasn't too sure what. It had kept him tossing and turning most nights, his brain working out trying to figure out what he was hiding. If he asked how his day was, Izuku would report it was good and recite something pleasant that had happened. If asked if he'd had fun, his expression would dim. It wouldn't be too odd if it were any other child, but Izuku loved learning. Something was going here. Eventually, he hoped he'd figure out what. When bringing a new child into your home, it was important to show your unwavering support. You had to make yourself their new safe place, because it was likely they didn't have one otherwise. Pushing them, pressuring them in any way, was heavily advised against unless it was an emergency or matter of safety. Izuku seemed okay enough to him, despite Toshinori's concerns about school. The matter doesn't feel pressing, and Toshinori has learned to listen to his gut. He'll do that here as well. Izuku will come to him eventually. He scoops the kid up, grin widening at the eruption of laughter he was met with. Yes, he definitely seemed at least all right to Toshinori, so the hero saw no reason to try and force him to talk about something he may not be ready to tell him. All things took time, and this was something he was not willing to mess up. He dared not risk it. This, Toshinori felt, was far too important to play around with. Fiend. Izuku gasped from his place, cradled in All Might's massive arm. All Might boomed a laugh. Bold words from a hero about to meet their end. Toshinori raised his other hand, swallowing a laugh at the way Izuku froze in his arms, eyes locking onto the slowly approaching appendage. The grin stretched across the freckled boy's face gave away his amused glee. If you have any last words, now would be the time to say them. Or forever hold dash. All Might was cut off by the shrill buzz of his doorbell. He jolted slightly, Izuku doing the same. The pair cluelessly stared at the door, turning to each other in near-perfect sync as though looking for answers in one another. They hadn't ordered anything today, though the promise of pizza for dinner to celebrate his good test grades still burned bright in the back of Izuku's mind. He hadn't seen Toshinori-san pull out his phone to get too large with extra cheese and Italian sausage, however. All Might shrugged. Izuku shrugged back. The doorbell gave another obnoxious buzz. Toshinori jolted, seeming to realize he actually had to answer it. Izuku pushed himself up slightly, sitting up in the crook of Toshinori's arm. He was secretly a little pleased he'd avoided the tickle attack. Izuku didn't want to say anything for fear of troubling his guardian, but there was still some discomfort that came with things touching his stomach. The impression of Toshinori's injury was still wafting around. It wasn't something Izuku could just shake away no matter how much he wished that were the case. He could only hope it would eventually fade away completely. He was tired of the pain haunting him. There were dreams to nightmares where it was dark and he was in pain, so afraid for his life despite not knowing why. He'd try to open his eyes to see where he was, but it was almost no use. The most he'd get was a flutter of the eyelids, giving a blurry impression of something gray and rocky. Rubble? Izuku was afraid to ask. The injury seemed personal, and the last thing he wanted to do was pry. Toshinori threw the door open, freezing in place instantly when his blue eyes met a familiar pair of yellow. He felt his breath escape him at the sight of his sidekick, belatedly noting that he probably should have seen this coming. From a mile away. It hadn't really occurred too much to him that he should contact his colleagues. Night Eye, Gran Torino, and probably Tsukachi as well. He'd been so wrapped up in Izuku's arrival that he hadn't put thought into it. Foolish. Now he and Izuku were stuck in an uncomfortable situation. Night Eye froze too, eyes roaming Toshinori's face briefly before they dropped to the child sitting on his arm. Izuku stared back, lips pressed together and cheeks puffed out awkwardly, his eyes wide and darting between Toshinori and his old sidekick as he held his breath. He didn't know what had caused their falling out, but he was ever the hero nerd and hadn't been completely in the dark about it. They weren't working together anymore. They hadn't for about a year now, and noting the arrival of Toshinori's injury, it was pretty clear what might have caused that. A part of him fanboyed. This was Sir Knight, All Might's sidekick. Which All Might was his dad now, but he was still sort of in shock about that and was struggling to process. Making the mental connection between the All Might he saw on screen growing up and the dorky one who decided to adopt him wasn't as easy as it sounded. Especially when he thought about this morning when Toshinori had tried to make himself a curly mustache out of whipped cream but had ended up inhaling it instead. Night Eye's expression didn't outwardly change. He looked between their matching shirts, Dad Might and All Son. A sharp inhale was all the real reaction he gave, mind reeling trying to figure out where this kid had come from. They looked young, but not so young that he could have been born this last year. He and All Might were apart. They had to be at least 8 based on their size, possibly older. All Might just stood there like the massive oaf he was, kid still perched there like a bird. Night Eye wasn't sure what to say, all the questions he'd been building up dying on the tip of his tongue at this new variable. Yet another thing he had not seen in All Might's future. Had his quirk failed him? Was it not working? This had never happened before. His ability had. It had always been absolute. He watched Toshinori and the child suddenly look each other. They seemed to communicate with their eyes for a moment. The freckled child raised their eyebrows at him, jerking his head at Night Eye slightly. Toshinori looked like he just essayed on a lemon. He painstakingly turned his head back towards Mirai, giving a grin that was tense at best. Sasaki only half regretted not calling inside, his curiosity drawing his gaze back to the child. He and Toshinori were clearly close. Father and son. Toshinori had never mentioned a kid. This had to be a new development. Suppose you should come in. Toshinori gave a stilted chuckle, stepping to the side. Night side-eyed him hard but bobbed his head nonetheless, briskly entering before the blonde hero could change his mind. The child watched him enter. He watched right back, calculating. We have a lot to talk about. I should have contacted you sooner. Indeed. Sasaki's frown creased. He crossed his lanky arms over his chest. The puzzle he'd known so well seemed only muddled now. The green-haired child was a piece he did not recognize. He did not fit. Yet he held on to All Might, gripping his shirt nervously. And Toshinori held him, so carefully and familiarly. Right, well, Toshinori coughed a little, clearing his throat. Izuku tugged on his shirt, giving him another look. Toshinori's nose scrunched up. He loved Mirai and had missed him, really and truly, but this was not what he'd expected. He'd expected a nice evening with his son eating pizza and watching more Might Man adventures. It had a surprisingly good storyline. Lots of backstabbing. This is Izuku Yagi, my son. I only adopted him recently, but I feel we've gotten on quite well together. Izuku, this is Mirai Sasaki, or Sir Night Eye, my old sidekick and good friend. The last part was tacked on hesitantly, glancing at Mirai for approval. The tall man didn't react, his brain kicking into overdrive with the new information. Son? Toshinori had chosen to adopt a child? How recently was recently? They didn't look all that special, rather plain as far as children went. The only things relatively notable were the fact that their face was a map of freckles, spread out like stars fanning across his cheeks and over the bridge of his nose. That and perhaps his hair. It was a fluffy green mess that curled wildly, matching the iridescent forest color of his eyes. No notable mutations or outward signs of a quirk. No resemblance to Toshinori whatsoever. Izuku analyzed Night Eye right back. The man's quirk, foresight, let him get the upper hand in a number of situations. He was an information-oriented hero, working in the background and preferring to stay in the shadows. He and All Might had made for a terrifying team, Night Eye gathering the intel and All Might knocking out the bad guys. He'd always admired Sir's ability to fight without the aid of a combative quirk. He was an inspiration, so level-headed and terrifying. He had to be insanely smart for All Might, someone who'd never taken a sidekick aside from Night Eye in all his time as a hero, to team up with him. It only made their separation all the more tragic. Izuku was a little scared. What if he didn't like him? Toshinori would listen to his sidekick if the man told him to take him back to the orphanage, right? But would he realize he'd made a mistake and get rid of Izuku? The idea made his chest feel hot and tight. He curled in on himself slightly, averting his gaze in a espinzy manner that did not go unnoticed by Sir. The action seemed to snap Toshinori from his train of thought, his blue eyes flitting down to Izuku and then back to Mirai. He centered himself and grinned easily. He was the #1 hero. He could adjust. It was just Mirai, and the man had a right to be here. He had to be curious and concerned about the new developments. Come on in and take a seat. Don't mind the mess. Toshinori breezed, glancing back over his shoulder at the man. He smiled. I think we have a lot of catching up to do. Mirai gave a small nod and an even smaller smile. It was a start. Third-person POV. Izuku rolls into a form that vaguely resembles a rice ball against All Might's side, absolutely tiny next to the hulking skyscraper of a man. Night Eye took a seat primly across from them, eyes crawling greedily across the apartment and taking everything in with insatiable hunger. Izuku could definitely understand that, solemnly enough. From one All Might fanboy to another, he too had soaked up the space like a happy sponge his first day in. He still did from time to time, but it was sort of like exposure therapy, to be honest. Now he was just numb to the awe. That was besides the point anyway. All Might was sweating like a pig waiting for slaughter, and it only got worse the longer his former sidekick stayed silent. He was doing his best to stay strong for Izuku, but he couldn't deny Mirai had mad intimidation points backing him. Not as many as Gran Torino All Might's worst nightmare, second to only All for One. Maybe, depending on his mood. Izuku, for the record, did not squeak like a startled mouse when Night Eye's gaze descended upon him like a vulture onto the corpse of a raccoon on the side of an interstate highway. The way his glasses glinted was ominous in the worst way, and Izuku momentarily wondered if there was something he could do to get out of this situation. A glance at Toshinori told him the man was going to be no help in bailing him out. He was just as pale as Izuku was. At least they were in this together, he guessed. If Izuku was going down, then he was, shamefully, going to drag All Might down by his hair antennas alongside him. A son. Night Eye somehow didn't sound impressed, those two simple words firing like missiles from a launcher. The newly awakened dad in All Might rose defensively to the challenge, batting them away with his shiny, fresh fatherly pride. He's cute. The blonde hero immediately blurted out, sounding distinctly offended on his behalf. Izuku pressed his lips together so tightly they formed a straight line and contemplated the benefits of willingly dissociating, and Night Eye still didn't look impressed. All Might, being the #1 hero, naturally did not waver in the face of this great threat. And very smart. The brightest child I know. And how many children do you know, Toshinori? Night Eye pet an eyebrow in a manner near elegant, and Izuku was once again overcome with a feeling of severe inadequacy. He really didn't like this. Could they go back to the part where he was criticizing Toshinori-san's food tastes? Burning muffins? Writhing in pain from the injury he'd taken? He'd even take the 13 paper cuts he'd gotten from their failed attempt at origami over that oppressive glower. Enough. Toshinori gave him the stink eye for a moment before collecting himself. Because he's a mature adult who does things maturely. That's besides the point. I'm sure you're here to address my increase in patrols. Night Eye nodded wordlessly as Toshinori puffed his chest out pridefully, the underground hero unable to stop the fondness that washed over him unbidden. Izuku looked between the pair hesitantly, trying to figure out whether or not he should say something. If he called for a bathroom break, he was pretty sure he'd at least make it out the front door before either of them could bring themselves to react. Or he could say he'd gotten food poisoning. But Toshinori-san had been eating all the same things as him and would definitely call him on it. Maybe. Or maybe he'd give him the out. It could be worth a shot. No, this is unavoidable, isn't it? He's pretty sure he hasn't been this scared in his entire life, barring that one time he found out his mother got burned alive. But trauma dictates that he's at least a little numb to all that. For now. He'll have another mental breakdown eventually. Night Eye is All Might's former sidekick, and it makes sense he'd show up eventually. Oh, woe is him. He got a nice, loving new home with the literal #1 hero, and now he has to talk to his super badass former sidekick who can see the future. He'll never recover. You appear better. I was worried you were straining yourself, but you look. Night Eye trailed off, brows furrowing. Like I did before? Toshinori prodded, grinning and pulling Izuku further into him. The boy let himself get manhandled limply, already having given up. This was it for him. He was too young to have a will, but he was beginning to regret not writing one anyway. Thanks to Izuku, I'm healed. The following silence was deafening and incredibly awkward, and Izuku debated the pros and cons of throwing a childish tantrum. Newly adopted kids tended to be troublesome and temperamental, right? He had at least 3 free passes to lose his sheet within the first 2 months before they got him a therapist, and that seemed like more than enough to him. Was this a situation that warranted using one of those chances? All Might knew some weird people. He may need to save them up for the future. There's no telling. Night Eye stared for a moment, looking as though he'd just been told they were going to lock him in a box and throw him into the stratosphere at terminal velocity. Izuku and Toshinori were politely quiet whilst the man had his come-to-Jesus moment, sharing a mildly concerned glance when Night Eye made a sound one would expect a disappointed hippopotamus to let out. As in, it was not entirely human and it gave them vast reason to worry. Did Night Eye need them to call someone? Was he okay? Toshinori made things worse by lifting his shirt up as proof, which got them another sound much like the last. Izuku slapped the pro-hero's hands, giving him a sharp look as his shirt dropped back down again. Toshinori shrugged uselessly, smile turning a little sheepish. He was literally dying like a week ago-ish. Or something. Izuku wasn't counting, but the point was that this was no doubt a real shock. Right. He was being inclusive and sensitive. It's my quirk. Izuku offered an olive branch, feeling rather satisfied by the way his dad lit up at his contribution to this conversation. Even though this was awful and he wanted to cry. Ditos. This is something he can cry about later when he freaks out about his problems collectively all at once. It's much more efficient that way. You healed him? Night Eye choked out, eyes wide and glasses slipping down the sharp slope of his nose. How? His wound, it was I saw. You saw wrong. All Might bellowed heroically, because that's kind of his whole shtick. Izuku selflessly reached out to me without regard to himself and aided me, and it's the least I can do to aid him myself. Not that he hasn't grown on me. I actually have quite a few pictures if you want to see. I was thinking of making a scrapbook or two to document his life. I would need categories based on topic, but... Pictures? Izuku asked, scandalized. Toshinori froze as the boy's green eyes narrowed. Show me. That's not necessary. Toshinori assured. Izuku's eyes went from suspicious slits to round, pleading puppy dog's eyes that made Toshinori hiss like a cat that had been dropped in a bucket of ice water. Don't do that. I'm not doing anything. Izuku said with all the faux innocence of former nun who was now a rave queen. Very specific, but it was necessary to be clear in situations like this. I just want to see the photos, Toshinori-san. There's only a few. Toshinori lied, averting his gaze. He subtly shimmied his phone so that it was buried underneath his thigh, debating what he could possibly change his password to that Izuku wouldn't guess. He claimed it was observation, but how could he have possibly known his password was David Shield's social security number? He was 10 for God's sake. Back up a moment. Night Eye demanded, saving Toshinori without even realizing. Izuku and his doting father both turned towards him in unison, looking as though they'd forgotten he was there. Mirai didn't appear to mind, raking a hand through his hair anxiously and leaving it all askew. He seemed misty-eyed, which was awkward. What did they do if he started crying? Toshinori scoured his memories and tried to figure out if Sasaki liked hugs. You're saying that you're healed? Permanently? Yeah. Izuku's voice came out small, and he resumed his rice ball form in an instant when Night Eye turned to him in a bewildered manner. I mean, I've never seen it wear off before, but I haven't used it that much. Good. All Might's claim had a grim undertone to it that made Mirai frown. Anyway, let's order pizza and then we can figure out where to go from there. They ate their pizza in silence for the most part, Izuku nudging Toshinori with his elbow every so often and jerking his head at Night Eye in an attempt to get his guardian to say something. Toshinori would just rapidly shake his head in response, having no idea how to approach this entire thing. What was he even approaching to begin with? They'd basically told him the entire story already. Izuku was amazingly smart, had healed him, and was now Toshinori's brand spanking new son. There was really no more meat to the story. The underground pro assessed the pair with a bit of caution. Izuku did not seem to have any ill intent. In fact, this all seemed like a massive coincidence if nothing else. A miraculous one, but a coincidence nonetheless. All Might does a charity event and a child there just so happens to have a healing quirk. It was just peculiar. A quirk of his magnitude never should have ended up in an orphanage to begin with. It was too powerful, and that implied it hadn't been recorded. The Heroes Association surely would have snatched him up by now if it had been. You have an incredible quirk, Izuku. Night Eye decided that was a good way to start. He watched the young boy jolt slightly, head swinging back in his direction. Toshinori cleared his throat. With a power like that, I'm rather surprised you were left at an orphanage to begin with. Healing quirks are in short supply. He tried to keep his tone as light as possible, but he wasn't all too sure how well that worked. Toshinori shifted a bit uncomfortably, glancing at Izuku as the boy fixed the pizza slice he was holding with a firm stare. There were more pieces to this puzzle than Toshinori had realized, no doubt. Night Eye felt himself become renewed with vigor. Toshinori All Might was healed. Back to his former glory, and now with a child who had the ability to remove injuries of massive proportion. His potential was overflowing. To have a power like that on the side of the heroes would make a world of difference in society. It also put Izuku in a dangerous position, but that was the least of their issues right now, Night Eye felt. After all, where was safer than under All Might's full protection? Clearly nobody knew about him, they'd have surely come to fetch him from the orphanage otherwise. Izuku cleared his throat a bit. He glanced up for a brief moment before flushing and looking back down. My quirk isn't legally registered as WL. Night Eye faltered. Toshinori blinked a bit. It's not. All Might really hadn't even thought to check. He beat at his brain but couldn't recall a given reason why his quirk would be hidden in such a way. Is there a reason why, my boy? Oh yeah. I'm supposed to hide it and not use it. Izuku recited with a nod, sounding quite sure of himself despite his nerves. Night Eye raised a brow at Toshinori, who was growing more concerned by the second. He should have asked about this. How hadn't he known? He just assumed his quirk was well listed. He'd had no reason to think it wouldn't be. Izuku sure hadn't brought it up before that. Because of the side effects? Toshinori asked. Mirai blinked, glancing at him. Side effects? That made sense, he supposed. He should have inquired about the limits of the power first before assuming its strength and flexibility. There was a chance he could only use it every so often, or it had some sort of backlash. Perhaps it drained energy like recovery girls did, but at a smaller proportion? Izuku felt himself begin to panic just a little. He knew they deserved and needed to know. Toshinori-san had brought him into his home and was giving him a life he never would have dreamed of. Devoted love and care that was a little bolder and a little louder his mother's had been, but just as warm. He wanted to trust them. He had to really, because who else was there? Sort of be but not really. Izuku admitted, suddenly seeming to close in on himself. Night Eye gave Toshinori an expectant look, but the blonde looked more panicked than anything else. They. Izuku shriveled up like a piece of old broccoli, and Toshinori cursed himself up and down. He should have known something more was up. He hadn't wanted to try and force Izuku to talk about anything he didn't want to, but maybe a few inquiries should have been made despite that. Clearly there was a lot more here that he probably needed to know. Izuku looked pale and clammy, his eyes downcast and shadowed over with something Toshinori had never seen before. His eyes were always so open. It's one of the many things All Might loved about him. Right now, however, they were entirely closed off. He couldn't say he was a big fan of the change. Toshinori could feel potent concern beginning to brew in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't shaping up to look good. He should have assumed, honestly, that something more had happened. He should have seen the signs. He's glad Night Eye is here. You mentioned your mother passed when your apartment building caught on fire. Night Eye's voice was uncharacteristically quiet. All Might held his breath as Izuku tensed. Was that fire an accident? Izuku opened his mouth only to snap it right back shut again, his eyes growing misty. He shook his head slightly, ducking his head as though he were ashamed. Toshinori felt something icy rush through his veins. The arm he had around Izuku tightened its hold a little, pulling the boy further into him. The #1 hero met Night Eye's gaze. His former sidekick looked grim, and All Might felt his own face pull into a frown. Someone was after Izuku, and they'd murdered his mother to try and get to him. And if they were willing to go that far. Well, it really is a miracle he hadn't been picked up from that orphanage before Toshinori showed up. Third-person POV. Izuku shut down after Night Eye's question about his mother, but the shake of his head still hung in the air like a bad omen. All Might didn't push. There was a sour feeling in the pit of his stomach, roiling like an oncoming storm. He knew there was more to this, something deeper and more dangerous. Someone out there knew about Izuku, and it was a small miracle they hadn't found or killed him yet. Whilst he was in that orphanage, anyone could have come by and just picked him up. And that would have been that. Maybe they already thought him dead. Or maybe they were still looking. The thought that anything might come and hurt Izuku made Toshinori's throat constrict and his muscles tighten with rage. Anyone who came after his son would have to go through him first. That, he felt, had become an unspoken certainty. All Might had never stood to the side before, and now is far from the time he'd start. The attachment he'd grown to Izuku had come on fast and strong, but Toshinori would be hard-pressed not to absolutely adore him. Smart, genuinely kind, and truly good right down to his bones, Izuku was quite possibly the best child All Might had ever gotten the pleasure of coming across. And miraculously, he has gotten the chance to adopt, raise, and befriend him. Even without him having been healed, Toshinori knows that he'd have found Izuku amazing. Izuku drew people in like a moths to a flame, his innate goodness and welcoming personality a testament to exactly what kind of man he'd one day grow to become. It was rare to find someone of genuinely upstanding character in this world, and yet here Izuku was, a shining light amidst a society that grows gradually darker with each passing day. Yagi, Night Eye started to say. All Might gave him a sharp, silencing look. His former sidekick's mouth snapped shut so fast the clack of his teeth was audible. It was strange to see Izuku curl into himself in such a way. It was telling enough of how bad things must have been. Whoever was after him was bad news. Luckily, there was truly no better place for Izuku to be than here in that case. I think we should table this discussion for another date, Toshinori said, and though it sounded like a suggestion, it was anything but. There was warning in his eyes. This talk as it was over. Agreed, Night Eye said, despite the questions rushing through his mind. He had too many to speak aloud, though he knew without having to ask them that Izuku probably had every few answers. His mother might have once, but she was gone. In fact, I think it's time for you to leave, Night Eye. All Might continued. There was no ill intent behind his words, or scorn. He glanced Izuku's way, and Night Eye nodded his understanding. Perhaps you'd be amiable to continue this in a more secure setting. On a different day. Really, All Might's apartment was about as secure as it could get, but Night Eye got where he was going with this. Questioning a child in their own home about uneasy topics would no doubt be damaging to said child's perception of the concept of safety. At Night Eye's agency with full security systems armed. For things just like this would be better. He stood fluidly. All Might mirrored the action. It was strange to see him back at full height this way, his eyes clear of the shadows Night Eye had grown used to seeing in all the press photos snapped of him. He looked healthy and young, the tension in his shoulders gone. Despite himself, Night Eye felt excited. All Might was back at his prime. The future he'd seen, of Toshinori sickly and on the battlefield about to face his end. Somehow, this boy had changed that. This boy had changed fate. Never, in all his time, had he seen such a thing. Yet he couldn't deny the obvious either. Unless the child's quirk wore off somehow, then. I am free all this week. Night Eye straightened his jacket, smoothing down the wrinkles that had formed in the fabric. He felt invigorated in a way he hadn't in years. All Might had rocketed back into the field, and Night Eye felt he was being helplessly tugged along for the ride. It was a feeling he'd missed. On the couch, Izuku flinched slightly. It was nearly imperceptible, but All Might's eyes were keen. Night Eye's were too. A frown curved at his face as Toshinori whipped back in his direction, looking almost comically alarmed by the reaction. A very far-away different day. All Might remedied, glancing down at his adopted son for approval. Izuku peeked at him with watery eyes, and he folded like a wet paper towel. A very, very far-away different day. Izuku curled back up. Night Eye resisted the urge to smack his palm against his own face. With all due respect, Night Eye started, because this wasn't the type of issue you sat on. This was the kind of bull you took by the horns and hoped didn't gouge you. Let it hit you in the back, and there you were, crumbled on the ground and paralyzed for life. Some adjacent metaphor along those lines. Immediately, Night Eye knew he'd misstepped. Toshinori's mildly stressed expression swapped to a mildly thunderous one instead. Night Eye froze in place, closing his mouth sharply for not the first time this evening. Fatherhood, it seemed, had made Toshinori far less compliant and loose. With all due respect, I will text you whenever he is ready. He stressed, pointing at Izuku as though Night Eye needed help figuring out who he was talking about. Leave. Night Eye, wisely, turned on his heel and left. It's not that Izuku is trying to be difficult. There's just something that seizes in his chest any time he thinks about talking about it. His voice catches in the base of his throat. He knows he should get it over with, that All Might and Sir Night Eye can help, but All Might isn't pressuring him. He hasn't even hinted at the possibility of them going to Night Eye's hero agency to talk to him. Instead, they got to watch a movie, bake cookies, and make up their own secret handshake. Izuku could feel himself relaxing more and more as the days rolled by, and it wasn't brought up again. Sometimes he knew Night Eye was emailing All Might, and maybe even trying to call, but Toshinori-san never mentions it. He just makes a face and taps away furiously at the screen, the phone hilariously tiny in his massive hands. Life reaches a lull. The knowledge that he eventually needs to talk about things casts a shadow, but not one so consuming and dark that Izuku can't see the brighter things. He feels consistently happy for the first time in a long time, living with All Might a simple and joyful thing. The routine they develop is an easy one. All Might works whilst Izuku is in school, saving lives and fighting villains, and comes around just in time to pick him up. They head home and spend time with one another, whether that's All Might helping him with his homework, them doing something together at home, or All Might donning his disguise, and them going somewhere. Izuku tries foods he's never even heard of. He traverses malls so big he never thought they could exist, and they visit gardens with blooming flowers and plants of every kind. They buy matching t-shirts and draw pictures at the park. All Might listens to Izuku ramble, and lets him ask the millions of questions he has about the man's patrol that day. Something warm unfurls in Izuku's chest knowing that Toshinori-san's booming laughter and the deep, even breaths he takes when he nods off are because of him. Izuku was able to give him that. He was able to take that pain away, and pay him back for all he'd done as the #1 hero. Izuku doesn't talk about the nightmares he has from it. Maybe one day he will, because he knows now that Toshinori-san would not hate him for it. The specifics, though? They will stay with him forever, he thinks. The things he sees, the sick that crawls up his throat sometimes, or the oily feeling that spreads out across his skin and makes him feel like he's suffocating when he wakes up from them. Those eyes flashing across his peripherals. And if there's a twinge of something sharp and harsh in his side occasionally, well, it'll wear off eventually. Anything he experiences as a result of the healing was, and always will be, 100% worth it in his eyes. Not a thing in the world would change his opinion on that. They came. Toshinori-san's shriek cuts through his mellowing train of thought. Izuku blinked rapidly, dropping the marker he hadn't realized he'd held in a white-knuckle grip and turning. Toshinori-san skids out of the entryway, box held over his head. You can be the all to my might. Toshinori-san looks so absolutely over the moon about the concept of even more matching shirts that Izuku can't do much aside from grin back. Remember when he said that Izuku is the best kid ever? Toshinori's got a drawing of himself framed right on his work desk that serves as proof that this is surely true. It's a good drawing, too. Izuku is very talented for his age. Dozens of missed emails from Night Eye glare at him from the screen of his phone, which beeps with another text from the man himself, which will go ignored. It's not that All Might isn't worried, or doesn't see the urgency of the situation. He does perhaps more than anyone. This isn't something they should wait on forever. Over a month has gone by and Izuku hasn't spoken a word of it, but All Might is holding out nonetheless. He can tell that Izuku wants to say something. He can see the boy on the very cusp of blurting it out, only to bite his lip last second and back down. He's right there on the edge if he can just take the plunge. Whatever happened, Toshinori refuses to push him on it. He wants to wait for Izuku to come to him for as long as possible. He wants Izuku to be ready and feel comfortable and to trust him enough to step forward all on his own. Right now he is safe and protected. The press doesn't know All Might has acquired a child, least of all who that child is. Out of the press eye, it's unlikely Izuku will be found, especially with his surname changed and his place of residence moved. All Might had felt uncertain about his schooling situation, but whoever had killed Izuku's mother likely didn't expect that he'd stay going to the same institution under a new title. Right? So far there'd been no incidents, and Toshinori prayed it stayed that way. He'd gotten Izuku a phone just in case, and a special watch with a panic button that would have Toshinori dropping whatever he was doing and vaulting out the nearest window to get to him. Now in peak physical condition, he could clear entire prefectures in a jump. He'd be there quicker than any emergency personnel could ever hope to be. Izuku was blooming like a flower. He was amazing in every way, shape, and form that Toshinori could discern. With his almost terrifying level of genius and an ability to empathize with anyone he saw, to analyze villains and heroes alike, and with a determination to simply help in any way he could that rivaled even Toshinori's drive. One for all buzzed beneath his skin. It was not time yet. Izuku was still young, merely 10 years old and still adjusting to the shaky, strange circumstances of this new life he'd been plunged into. He and Toshinori were still figuring out all the little ways their puzzle pieces fit together. Toshinori loved him, and Izuku seemed to love him too, but they were both still fresh in this field. Still, even with the boy this young, Toshinori knew. The decision had been made. Nana always joked that she'd known within mere hours of meeting him. That there was this click, and suddenly there could be no other holder of her quirk. Toshinori hadn't thought much about those words until now. Now he understood. Izuku was meant to be 9. It made him giddy. The idea that he'd one day get to share that with Izuku. Most parents pass their quirk onto their child in some way, shape, or form. Toshinori's way was a little more unconventional, but he'd still be passing on his legacy to his son, and that made something in him want to shout with glee. On his desk, phone gave another chime. Not a "this is night I, do not answer unless you want to be heckled" chime, but the special one Izuku had somehow set for himself. No matter how many times Toshinori changed his password, Izuku still managed to get in. It was utterly fascinating and he loved it. Scrambling for the device, Toshinori beamed a grin at the text Izuku had sent him. A photo of a half-finished drawing, as well as a hesitant, polite request for pizza for dinner. All their debate about it this morning, with the mutual agreement that pineapple paired with mushroom was a grievous crime, had apparently drawn him into craving it. Texting back his enthusiastic affirmative, Toshinori leapt to his feet with newfound purpose. Never mind paperwork. School would be out in a mere 3 hours. He needed to find the best pizza place in Japan, and he needed to find it now. It's something they should have done sooner. For all Izuku's insistence that he was perfectly fine, Izuku could literally break his leg and would likely be saying the exact same thing anyway. So really his opinion on the matter wasn't all that reliable. For all Izuku insisted that his quirk side effects didn't have any lasting effect on him, the simple fact of the matter was that he'd never healed an injury as severe as Toshinori's was. Toshinori had been looked at by every specialist you could think of. Across the globe, they had scoured for some way and they'd found it, in a manner of speaking. He'd survived. Impossibly, he had somehow survived. With the damage done to him, it shouldn't have been possible for Toshinori to walk away from it in any sort of shape, even as poor as his was before meeting Izuku. He defied fate and he lived to tell the tale, and that alone had been a miracle despite the missing organs and twisting scar. This is astonishing. It was the first time All Might had ever seen Recovery Girl looked any level of stunned. The expression on her face was nothing short of utterly flabbergasted as she pressed her stethoscope further into his side, like the unlabored breaths she was hearing were somehow a result of her not pushing it in hard enough. "Yagi, you're really saying this boy did this? With no lasting side effects?" Toshinori wanted to say yes, but he didn't. Instead he turned to look at Izuku with raised brows. Immediately, the boy flushed and ducked his head. Recovery Girl whirled on the freckled boy not for the first time since they'd been here. She'd practically fainted when Toshinori lifted his shirt. She actually had for a moment, when she'd asked how it was possible and he'd pointed at the perfect, adorable, super smart, best child ever, 10-year-old he'd brought with him. Izuku had been asked every question under the sun, all so fast he hadn't even gotten a chance to answer any of them yet. Honestly, Toshinori wasn't sure he'd ever witnessed Recovery Girl as lively as she was right now. Her eyes were wide open, her back straight, and she seemed to almost grow taller as she bounced between the pair of them. And no, serious ones. Izuku offered, arms curling around his middle. Toshinori frowned. It was the most he'd gotten Izuku to talk about his quirk since. Nothing I won't get over as time passes. Not reassuring at all, but Toshinori forced himself to keep his mouth shut. Maybe Recovery Girl was just intimidating, or maybe her also having a healing quirk had something to do with it, but either way, Izuku was being more open than he'd been at all so far. His quirk was a touchy subject, something he was almost afraid to talk about. Anytime Toshinori prodded near the topic, even if it was just about what it did and how it did it, nothing pertaining to his past Izuku would brush it off. Clam up, get quiet. He was incredibly hesitant to speak out, and Toshinori refused to force him. Dear God. It's like there's 2 of them. Recovery Girl pinched the bridge of her nose. Toshinori couldn't help but puff up at the insinuation that he and Izuku were alike in any way, even if the comparison wasn't a flattering one. Lift up your shirt. Izuku pales. Toshinori goes pale too. Recovery girl reaches out, whacks Izuku's arms with her cane, and lifts the shirt up for him. For a heart-stopping moment, Toshinori has some absolutely horrible vision of his own scar on Izuku's torso. He almost expects to see it, even if Izuku had lifted his shirt up before to prove to him that it wasn't there. His breath catches and his body freezes, because at first glance he can almost see it. It hadn't been there before. The marking. So pale it's almost white, there's a silhouette of his old scar, Toshinori supposes he could call it. It's stained across Izuku's skin like a brand. It's not raised or sunken, there's no change in texture that Toshinori can see. It's just as though it's been dyed there, this odd, mangled swirl of pale color. It's stark against Izuku's skin tone. Toshinori's eyes are stuck on it. The pale shadow of his old injury, marring his son's side. He feels a little sick, and his own side gives a ghostly pang in remembrance. Izuku should not be wearing Toshinori's failure like that. He shouldn't be so okay with it either. Izuku smiles sheepishly, unbothered. He doesn't flinch when Recovery Girl reaches out to harshly prod the edges, and something in Toshinori relaxes slightly at that. It is not as sensitive as the real thing had been, at least. It doesn't hurt. It's just an echo. Izuku offers quietly, head ducking. I only have one other. They take a week or two to sink in. It's why it wasn't there before. Meaning the side effects didn't just last those agonizing hours after Izuku let go of his hand like he claimed. Yagi here said you felt the pain of his injury. From the first blow to the very last, and then some. Recovery Girl pulled away, and Izuku dropped his shirt. Are there any other lasting effects? If you're wanting to be a hero one day like he seems so keen to brag about, it'll be here at UA. I'll need to know the details of your power one way or another, so you may as well get it over with. Surprisingly, that seems to work. Izuku swallows thickly, hunching in on himself slightly. Toshinori brings an arm up to wrap around him. His feels bubbly and fond despite himself when Izuku leans into his side. Pain like that, Izuku cuts himself off and grimaces for a moment, backtracking. It's not that I still feel it. It's that. That level of pain is traumatic to the body and I guess to my nerves, or something. I get phantom jolts. I took all aspects of it in a way, so I'll probably always have occasional aches and nightmares. About the injury? Recovery Girl questioned as Izuku trailed off, voice growing distant and eyes a little hazed as he thought about it. She looked expectantly up from the clipboard she was scribbling on. Toshinori's throat tightened all over again when Izuku shook his head. Not the injury. Izuku's hand clenched into his t-shirt, right over where the pale marking he now bore was. Forever a reminder of the burden he'd taken from Toshinori. The fight. My quirk connects me to the experience. To the fear, in anger, and Izuku's eyes well with tears, and for some reason he looks ashamed. Toshinori cannot fathom why. It feels like every part of him has gone icy cold. Like he's been plunged into a vast, Arctic lake, and the top is freezing over and trapping him beneath the surface. It had been bad enough, knowing this child had taken on the pain of his injury. The most agony Toshinori has ever felt in his life. Izuku had felt every minute of it. He'd felt every bone break. He'd felt the pain of losing a lung and having his ribs blown out. Of his arm twisting in ways no arm should twist, of his legs cracked and skin shredded. He'd felt the burns. He'd felt a hole get torn into his side. That alone was bad enough, but to know he'd felt every ounce of fear Toshinori had felt in that moment. To know he'd seen the horror of All for One, even if it was just snapshots of it. The hopelessness, the hatred, and overwhelming, all-consuming pressure that comes with thinking you are going to die. Izuku is 10 years old. He's just a boy. And he didn't. He'd looked Toshinori in the eyes and smiled when he took his hand. He didn't hesitate for a second. Izuku. Toshinori croaks out. His eyes are wet, and he tries not to let his tears fall as Izuku blinks up at him curiously. He doesn't seem bothered, or particularly upset discussing what he went through. You shouldn't, huh? Toshinori-san. Izuku shakes his head immediately, and then he grins at him. It's a small grin, almost secretive in a way, perhaps mischievous. It fits the youthful roundness of his face. I'd do it again tomorrow if I had to. He says it almost nonchalantly. Like it's obvious, the only logical choice. Toshinori is nearly bowled over by the simplicity of his resolve. There's no tears in his eyes or turmoil. He's not overly emotional. To him it was worth it. Impossibly, all that suffering was worth it to him. He's going to be an amazing hero. And Toshinori thinks he may be truly learning what it means to be a parent, because that terrifies him. There's no words he can conjure up, so he doesn't try. He wraps Izuku up in a hug instead. Recovery Girl is polite enough not to say anything, turning her attention to her clipboard to continue writing her observations down. Izuku hugs him back fiercely, like he'll be able to convey with that alone just how much he means it. If he notices Toshinori crying, he doesn't pull back to gawk at him for it. He just hugs him harder, too small to wrap all the way around him. Tiny. A reminder of how young he is, of what he went through because of Toshinori. Sitting there, Toshinori makes himself a promise. Maybe he couldn't save Nana. Maybe he could hardly save himself. But Izuku? Nothing is going to happen to him. Anyone who tries is going to have to kill him first.